Thank you so much for having me here. Can't tell you how pleased I am to, basically be in this wonderful city to discuss such an important topic. And I promise I will try not to talk for 1 hour, because I would really like to give space to discussion, questions, comments, and basically exchange. I was really astonished. I don't know why I was astonished, but I still was, to hear the previous panel, our colleagues here, the incredible similarities of the experiences that we have in our respective institutions. Same institutional resistances, same stories. Doesn't matter which region you come from. It's just really, really shocking to hear how much we have in common, sadly, but also to know that we have colleagues that are walking the same paths. So I'm here to present to you what we've done at Central European University to try to tackle the problems of harassment and sexual harassment that we have in our institution. You will see the graphics here are basically taken from our informative leaflets and our communication campaign. So we also have the issue that our policy is long and complicated, and we needed to translate it in a friendly user leaflet for students and for employees who are entering the university as part of their welcome package. They get an info session on our policies and a friendly leaflet that they will hopefully read to get acquaintance with our sexual and harassment and sexual harassment policy. So here we go. And of course, I welcome questions and I also welcome interruptions. So a little bit of background. So how this came about, how our work came about. Central European University joins a EU-funded SUPERA project. That is the acronym for Supporting the Promotion of Quality and Research in Academia. It took me months to learn that, but that's how it is. And we joined this project in 2018 with a 4-year project. It's literally ending now in May 2022. And together with our 5 other institutions, we are working on designing and implementing the first gender equality plan in each of our institutions. So our work on harassment is framed under the SUPERA efforts of our first gender equality plan. As you probably guessed, the first phase of our designing the gender equality plan is to assess what's going on in our institution in terms of gender equality. And the European Commission had set the key action areas we should be doing our assessment on, so this was not of our choice. The key action areas in which we have to assess the status quo and work on improvement is number 1, recruitment, selection, and career progression, both for employees and for students. Then gender balance in leadership and decision-making processes, integration of a gender dimension in research and education content, and last but not least, a cross-cutting area, gender biases and stereotypes. Exactly there is where sexual harassment is being tackled. So what did we do to assess how our institution was doing in terms of sexual harassment? We applied 2 methods. The first one was a text analysis of our already existing policy on harassment. We had a policy since 2013, so quite early days, at least in Hungary, where we were back then. We had a policy already ongoing, and we basically sat down and checked what that policy said. And then we also had a community-wide survey. We had more than 500 respondents from the student, academic, and administrative body. Our university is a private American university. Therefore, 500 people is a lot of people. So for you to have an idea, we have 1,500 students per year and around 700 employees, both admin and academic together. So 500 respondents is a relevant amount of people. And we asked about basically 3 things in this survey. direct and indirect experiences of sexual harassment in the past 5 years. So this survey was also circulated among alumni of the institution. Direct experiences are basically when people are victims of sexual harassment, and indirect experiences are when people witness sexual harassment. We asked about attitudes and beliefs about sexual harassment, so basically stereotypes and myths, and then about the policy, whether are you aware that we have a policy, and are you familiarized with the content of that policy? So those were the two tools that we used for the assessment phase. What did we find out? Our policy had some important strengths. One of them is that there was a broad definition of harassment that included all types of severity, from the most, so it would be lighter forms of harassment like jokes, comments, and so on, until physical aggression. It also had a broad scope and broad target groups. This means that the policy considered the policy covered harassment in Central European University premises, but also activities outside our premises that were related to some activity of our university. I'm going to give you some example, which is sadly a very common one. There's a conference at CEU. We invite people from different universities, and after the conference, these people go to a bar or to a restaurant or to a nightclub to socialize after the conference. Whatever happened there is also covered by the policy, because we interpret that the social activity is related to a CEU academic activity. And in terms of target groups, it's also very wide, includes, of course, students and employees, but also externals who come, for example, for a conference, contractors. So these are the companies who are taking care, for example, of cleaning the buildings, cleaning the offices, and also security. They are providing security services for the university. And invited speakers, invited professors. So basically, everybody who steps on CEU is covered under this policy. And we also had broad time limits for reporting. So back then, sexual harassment had a time limit of 5 years after the incident has occurred for somebody to step forward and report an incident, which is was quite good. But of course, we found a zillion other problems, many areas for improvement in the policy text itself. We had the problem that we had too many people mandated by the policy to take complaints. So in our previous policy, basically, if you had been a victim or a witness of harassment, you could go to report to the unit head, to your unit head, and to any key officers of the university, which included the dean of students, the provost, the rector. Our university probably has, I would say, taking all unit heads and department heads together, I would aim at maybe 25, 30 units. So there you have 30 people who are mandated to take complaints, plus the rector, the provost, and dean of students, which at that time happened all to be men. And of course, you have all of these people who actually have no training whatsoever in sexual harassment, are not necessarily sensitized to the topic, taking complaints from students and employees. Another problem that we had is that the policy's procedures to solve the harassment incident were actually too adversarial. So both informal and formal procedures ended up somehow in the victim confronting the alleged harasser with the provost in between, trying to mediate some sort of solution. And of course, people were quite reluctant to go that way. Therefore, we will see that that had an impact on the level of, or the amount of complaints that we were actually receiving. And as I said, there were two main mechanisms for reporting: an informal mechanism that was not supposed to trigger any disciplinary sanctions or investigative procedures by itself, but rather reach an amicable solution. And that's where the provost would sort of mediate between the parties involved. And then a formal mechanism of complaints that might eventually lead to disciplinary sanctions, and for sure, if the complaint had merit, then it would trigger an investigative procedure, and that would go through a body that we have at university that is called disciplinary committee. So these were the two channels. But unfortunately, as you might imagine, we had a severe underreporting problem. In our survey, we found out that less than 3% of the incidents were actually reported. I was actually surprised to hear the exact same percentage in one of our presentations an hour ago. So it looks like it's quite, of course, this is not a CEU phenomenon. And the reasons for not complaining were very much alike the ones that you have mentioned. The first one is, well, the incident was not severe enough to be reported. Okay, fair enough. But then there was a lot of lack of institutional trust. So people really didn't think that reporting would lead anywhere. Lots of fear of retaliation, of course, in the sense that the employment of these people might depend on the goodwill of the people who were on top and harassing them at the same time. Lack of confidentiality. They were not actually certain that their complaints would remain confidential. And something that might be a CU phenomenon, but I suspect it's not. We are a small university, therefore everybody knows everybody, and there are lots of personal relationships, alliances, friendships, and also political alliances and loyalties inside the university. Therefore, you would go to complain to somebody who might be a very close colleague or a very good friend of the harasser himself. Therefore, how would people feel comfortable with coming forward with a complaint in that scenario? Another big problem that we had was the lack of record keeping. So our policy actually mandated that all complaints that would come in the system must be written, must be recorded somewhere, but this was not happening. So according to our survey, seven people had submitted complaints in the past 5 years, but when we went to check where those records were, they were nowhere to be found. So we consult with the disciplinary committee, nothing there. They bounce us to human resources, nothing there. Human resources bounces us back to the disciplinary committee, nothing there. Dean of students, nothing there, nothing. So this, as you imagine, is a big problem, not only because it makes it impossible to monitor what's going on in your university, but also because there's a huge lack of accountability and room for discretion in the way that complaints are handled. So if everything is handled at this informal level that leaves no written trace, then there's no way of checking policy compliance. And another thing that you might, of course, then tell me if I'm wrong or not, I believe this might not be only the case of our university, that these complaints, the ones that actually made it to an informal procedure, would be settled in a very, old boys club way, in which somebody would take somebody else for coffee and say, hey man, what you're doing is not nice, just beware, maybe don't drink so much beer when you go with your colleagues or with your students, because it's creating problems. So this is the way that it would be sorted. Sometimes this is what a very successful way of sorting it out, because it might happen that somebody is actually maybe harassing in a way that they are not totally conscious about. So this had a little bit of positive impact, but all in all, you probably agree with me that this is not the way that we should be solving harassment in a university, because it very much relies on basically men drinking coffee together and solving things backstage. And of course, these things really feed on lack of transparency. But you will correct me if you have different impressions, please. And another thing that we had, and again, probably not unique to CEU, as I've heard from you before, insufficient training. First of all, no training for the people who took the complaints, and then no training for the wider community. This is an issue that now we are tackling. You probably read in literature that how effective training, anti-harassment training is quite contested. Does it help? Does it not help? Does it create backlash? So far, at least for the literature that I've been in contact with, the type of training that has proven most effective is bystander training. So basically, teaching a harasser not to harass is a lost cause and lost waste of time and resources. That person is not going to stop harassing because he is told not to, especially if he's very well aware of what he's doing. But rather, the most effective way of preventing harassment is to teach and to train bystanders, so witnesses, to speak up, to intervene in a situation, or to report at a later stage if intervening in the situation is not safe. But once again, here I very much welcome your feedback if you have different experiences or information. So now we are in the making of our first bystander training that we're going to deliver at the end of this month. So what did we do? We had all of these problems with our policy, but we had also identified our strengths. So we put together a working group with members of the community who volunteered their expertise, their institutional experience in many hours of hard work to come with ideas, with solutions to the problems that we found, and to put them in the shape of a policy, which is another challenge. So who did we have there? So first of all, me. I'm the Gender Equality Officer of the university, graduate from Gender Studies. So in parentheses, you will see which department we come from. Is the jargon of our university, so I'm from Gender Studies. Then we had the chair of the Equal Opportunity Committee in our university, which is a watchdog kind of committee. It's not an executive committee, but it's there as a watchdog. The chair is an expert in public policy and herself an expert in gender-based violence. We had two members of the Equal Opportunity Committee, both of them lawyers. A member of the Senate. The Senate is our decision-making body in the university. It's sort of democratic, so we brought somebody from there who happened to be, not by coincidence, a philosopher on ethics. Our new chair of the disciplinary committee. So in the meantime, something that really impressed me, once again for the similarities in the previous talks, is that these processes are so long that you have changes in leadership in between, and you have to navigate all of this. So in the meantime, the chair of the disciplinary committee changed, and now we had an amazing one, a woman, of course, also a lawyer and a public policy expert, and she was extremely helpful in the putting together of the new policy. Also because she inherited a disciplinary committee that had no records of their previous activities. She was beyond shocked. Therefore, it was very good for her as well and for her work to have a more solid and functional harassment policy. So whichever complaints landed on her desk, she would have a solid procedure to work with. The Dean of Students, who had lots of institutional experiences because he had worked a bit like a mediator in the past for informal complaints. and two very committed PhD students from the history department who had kickstarted something of this sort at the level of the department, and they were happy to contribute to the making of an institutional policy. So we basically drew people from everywhere. All of these people were working for free. This is how it works, at least in my university. So what did we do? We did some desk research of how other universities are doing this. And as an American university, we also, of course, researched a bit on how they manage in the US, although the different legal framework there, the famous Title IX that we don't have in Europe, made it not so straightforward to adopt some of the ideas out there. But what I mean to say here is that we didn't invent the wheel, we didn't reinvent the wheel, we basically took what we thought was the best out of the options already available. And we came up with this combination. So maybe what is novel and innovative is the combination of solutions and not necessarily the elements themselves. So first of all, we said, okay, let's put together an ombudsperson's network. Let's take the mandate out of all of these unit heads and key officers who are a zillion people who rotate, because some of these people actually rotate. So from the administrative units, they do not rotate so much, but academic departments do have different heads every 2-3 years. Therefore, you have to train people, and then 2 years after, train new people, etc., etc. It's incredibly costly, so it's not doable. Therefore, let's put there a group of ombudspersons who represent different parts of the university to deal with informal complaints. And we came across an app for smartphones that was designed in the US and it was used in several US campuses called Callisto. You can totally find the TED Talk on Callisto on YouTube and probably on the Tech Talk website. Explaining how this app was designed and which purposes it would serve in terms of reporting harassment. So we thought this might solve many of our problems, because this app might not only be of use as a reporting tool, but also as a centralized recording system of the cases that we didn't have. And these two elements would basically communicate with each other. The formal mechanism of complaints, so the one that lands on the table of the chair of the disciplinary committee, we left that one untouched. So we didn't deal, the harassment policy mainly deals with the mechanism of the informal complaints. The formal complaints are, of course, the mechanism is listed there, but when something turns formal, it jumps out of the harassment policy into the code of ethics of the university. Nevertheless, the chair of the disciplinary committee has access to this app, and people can also report formally in this app. So the app has both a user end for complaints and a back end in which ombudspeople and the chair of the disciplinary committee can have access to the complaints that enter the system. And it's a differential access that I will explain later. So this ombudspeople network, we thought, what we basically did is we called for nominations, so self-nominations and nominations from members of the community, to academic staff, to admin staff, and one PhD student. And also 5 members that are in reserve. So in case somebody goes on sabbatical or decides they cannot do this anymore, then somebody else can step up. And these members of the community brought all of their nominations in, and together with the Equal Opportunity Committee, we would select from those candidacies, and then they were appointed by the Senate of the university. We would provide these 5 people, actually 10, with highly specialized training that has never been done before. So now we have a network of people who actually know what they're doing, or they know a little bit better than the ones that were there before. And their task is to first receive and then resolve or handle informal complaints. And would guide the complainant throughout the process, basically tell them what they could do, could not do, what the options are, etc. Regarding the app for smartphones, we called it Speak Up. Okay, pun intended. And it's an online 24/7 safe platform to submit complaints. We also wanted this to be a very readily available way of submitting complaints, because you know that the sooner you basically complain or put forward a record, the more you remember, the more details. Therefore, we wanted people to be able to report something on the spot. And it also, as I said, functions as a centralized recording system. Therefore, everything would be kept in this app. And the app you would be able to submit records, disclosures in 3 ways: anonymously, informal, and formal. And I'm going to zoom in here, because I think this is, first of all, is the novelty for us, because we didn't have an anonymous option before, and because I think it's the generally most controversial and debatable, if you wish. So what are these anonymous disclosures? The idea is that by default, anonymous disclosures wouldn't trigger an investigative procedure, but it would serve the university to detect patterns of behavior. As you probably know, harassers do not harass only once, but repeated times. Therefore, it would function as some sort of red flag that something is going on in this department with this professor, let's put it that way. And it would form something that Sarah Ahmed called complaint collectives. Many people do not dare to step forward because they think they are the only ones. But if you have an app that is basically taking all of those complaints in, that point to the same alleged harasser, then these people are not alone anymore in their complaints. How it functions is that after 3 or more complaints against the same perpetrator would enter the system, then the ombudsperson network would get an email notification. Please check the app because 3 or more complaints have entered the system against X, John Smith, let's call him. And as I said, it wouldn't trigger investigative procedures or disciplinary sanctions, except on some cases. So we didn't leave this like that. So in cases in which there's criminal liability, then the disciplinary committee will take this and will investigate this. Basically because it's in the interest of the university not to have somebody committing criminal acts inside the institution. Other relevant additions in our new policy, so we call it amendment, but it was so radical that we can say that we wrote a brand new policy. We were much more clear about what role intentions play in harassment. We wanted to make people aware that harassment does not need to be intentional to be considered harassment. So I didn't mean it doesn't get you off the hook. The fact that the behavior may not have been unwelcome to others or had been accepted in the past is irrelevant. So also the excuse of, now nobody sees this to be so, nobody perceives this as so severe, she doesn't have a sense of humor, this is not an excuse. The complainant does not need to have explicitly stated that the behavior was unwanted. So also she didn't tell me she didn't want it is not an excuse, and being under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or otherwise intoxicated is also not an excuse. It probably resonates with many excuses you have heard in the past. Also made it much more clear, there was already an article on retaliation, but we made it much more detailed. So we put a list together of situations in which retaliation was considered to be a severe violation of the policy, And if retaliation happened against an ombudsperson, then that was considered now a serious breach of the policy. We now allowed organizations to be complainants. So, for example, the student union, the trade union, or the works council, now they can come and put forward a complaint in representation of a group of individuals. And overall shorter times for complaint resolution and a clearer allocation of responsibilities. So we're not giving that much time to the disciplinary committee to react to a complaint entering the system.